Go. So, welcome to a new month, a new year, and the next section of our um, Atlantic School of Discipleship program. It's delightful to see you and to know that people have responded to the survey that I sent out about last term, and that input was very helpful. Pleased to welcome a new group from the United Church in Kentville, Ontario, and we're delighted that they've decided to join us for the second part of this journey for the year. I'm really delighted to welcome my colleague, Dr. Alida Faber, joining us this evening, uh, coming to us from sabbatical. So it's very kind of her to break into this free time for a couple of evenings and to provide us with some reading. And so we're very grateful for that. So can we start with prayer? Gracious God, we thank you for the gift of this community of learning. We thank you for those who study and think deeply and share with us their wisdom and their knowledge and their insight. And we thank you for the gifts that are brought into this circle. And we look forward to what you will teach us through Alida and through one another. Bless our time together, we ask. Amen. And so Alida is the professor of systematic and ethical theology, something like that, systematic theology and ethics in at AST. And you can read more about her on the link that was sent to you with the email. Delighted to turn it over to you now, Alida. And thanks so much for joining us again this year.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, where I thought I'd begin is the January 13 questions, just to start with the epigraphs and if just to hear if something stood out for you in those.
I think people are refreshing their memories or maybe looking for the first time. Now, folks, you're not usually this shy.
Well, okay, I'll confess I didn't get through all the readings.
Okay.
But do you have the page conversation as love of God and neighbor? That's what I'm talking about, the
Oh, okay.
epigraphs. So it's those
Yes.
quotes.
Yep, I got it. And nothing really jumped out at me about it.
Anyway, sorry, anyone else?
Who is it?
Okay.
I regret I printed off 5 documents and read
Yes.
them all, and among them that document I did not print or did not find.
Oh,
So my apologies.
oh, okay.
My apologies.
So I will read a couple to you. The first is from Jules Delorme's. It's a lyrical novel. His mother was white and had a severe form of schizophrenia. His father was indigenous, had been sexually abused by his father, who was probably sexually abused in residential schools. And it's an extremely powerful narrative, told in indigenous style, so repetition, constant repetition. And as you can see here, it feels a bit run on, but when you read the book as a whole, this makes a lot of sense in terms of how his mother told him I could kill you and get away with it because of her mental illness. His father tried many times very severe beatings. Um, and he really took respite in the relationship with his grandmother, who, after residential schools, returned to indigenous ways and um, was therefore not buried in the Catholic cemetery when she died. And he says human beings talk too much. They are too needy, even when they're quiet. Very few human beings know how to be with you without crowding your spiritual space. I know two people who do, and that is more than most people will ever know. Animals never interfere with spiritual vision. I try my best to return the favor. Another one that is really one of the key points made by Simone Weil in the essay that I assigned for this evening, Reflections on the Right Use of School Studies with a View to the Love of God. So she wrote to a priest. Simone Weil, like Augustine, a mystic, but she's a 20th century mystic. Augustine is 4th century and 5th century. And she writes, not only does the love of God have attention for its substance, and note also that earlier in the essay she said attention is a substance of prayer. Not only does the love of God have attention for its substance, the love of neighbor, which we know to be the same love, is made of the same substance. So attention is key to love of God and neighbor. Those who are unhappy have no need for anything in this world but people capable of giving them their attention. The capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. It is almost a miracle. It is a miracle. The love of neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say to him, what are you going through? And then she also says, attention is the rarest form of generosity. So when we think about conversation, um, those two quotes from Jules Delorme suggest a capacity to be silent with someone is really critical. And they also presence in relation to the sufferer. You've probably had people better and worse responses if you were having a hard time. Um, and so she's saying, well, in fact, that is a very difficult thing to do, to stay still and attentive to someone who's suffering. Is that just from that? Do you have any comments just on those two quotations?
That sounds very Buddhist. Not, being
Yeah.
distant from the suffering, being able to handle the suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She was interested in Eastern religions. So that connection makes sense, yeah, for sure. Other observations?
I really like the quote that attention is the rarest form of generosity.
Yeah.
I tend to practice that, so that really hit home for me. And the
Mm-hmm.
idea that it's hard to be present and just listen or not say anything when people have silence.
Yeah. Other other ideas, observations?
Is it because we feel compelled to help or offer advice? Is that the or and is it our own discomfort with suffering and we figure we can uh, talk our way out of it?
Yeah, those are really good questions. The the way that Simone Weil talks about it, she's talking about affliction, the level of social, physical, and psychic suffering um, that she compares with in a flock of hens, if there's an injured bird, the others will attack it. And she says that we have that same tendency even toward ourselves to attack our own suffering, to not it's something that confronts us, the sheer necessity. It's not something it's not um, a relationship that we look for or want, the relationship with affliction. So it for Vey it makes us aware of how subject we are to gravity and to chance and necessity. So yeah, all of those things we probably want to avoid being too aware of. Linda, did you want to make a comment?
I was simply going to say I agreed with Ross. That's exactly what I was thinking, that we
Yeah,
want to help so much that we can't handle the silence. We need to fill the void with something, whether it's caring thoughts or hopefully we're not
yeah,
attacking, but yes.
yeah, yeah. And Vey says that in her essay on school studies is we want to be in search of something. We want to try to do anything but sit and wait. And she advocates waiting on God, that we can't leap our way to God. And that really informs how she talks about relating to the sufferer as well. Any other observations?
I
I,
just finished reading the five love languages. And one of the love languages is actually the gift of presence, and not just like presence with a TS, but presence with a CE.
Mhm.
And that was really interesting for me because that is exactly what friendship is. That's what that loving God is. It's that presence. It's that being fully, not only fully open, but also fully attentive to that other, the other.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's interesting is I don't know if you got a chance to look at the various epigraphs, the quotes that begin, but Stanley Cavell, who taught at Berkeley and Harvard, he died not too long ago, and he was kind of doing weird things with philosophy that he was, looking at film, romantic comedy, Philadelphia Story, and so on. That wasn't really done at that time. Um, but in this case, he's looking at King Lear. King Lear might have saved Cordelia had he done what every love requires, put himself aside long enough to see through to her and to be seen through. So this is a reciprocal, um, you allow yourself to be seen, but you don't need to be so preoccupied with yourself that you can put yourself aside, um, to see the other person, that being really critical forms of presence. And when we keep avoiding that, he calls that the avoidance of love. And he said it's not a really dramatic thing. It's just constantly, repetitively avoiding that kind of presence with another person that he calls avoidance of love. Okay, so what we're doing here is thinking, and I want to highlight silence as something we don't always think about in terms of conversation, but conversation in terms of um, the the double love commandment, the central ethic of Christian life, and how can we be more present, to use the term Michelle introduced, how can we be more present um, to that calling through daily conversations, mundane conversations, is really the question that we're looking at tonight. So am I able to share the screen? And this would literally be for a second. Okay, let me
You should be
try.
good.
Whoops. Okay, I will just try this. Mhm. And I'm just very briefly looking at this. This is a framework for ethics from Samuel Wells and Ben Quash, Introducing Christian Ethics. And essentially, conversation, the way that we're going to be thinking about it, approaches all of, and typically our ethics does draw on all these approaches to ethics: universal, subversive, ecclesial, more generally known as virtue ethics. Universal ethics, the name says, it's for everyone. The question is essentially, what should I or we do? And it focuses on decision and right actions and intentions. And I'm not going to go into detail about it, but to say that um, commandment in theological approaches, the command to love God and neighbor as ourself is universal ethics. It applies at all times and places. And for Augustine, it's at the heart of interpreting the scripture, is that it has to conform to this love ethic. Subversive ethics, and this is Ian Williams, he's talking about this and what voices are silenced in conversation. And so it's looking at the dynamics of power, um, and what are the power dynamics? And so we think in categories of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, and so on. And then finally, ecclesial ethics, virtue ethics, is how can we respond? Now, Ian Williams is not approaching conversation as a Christian, but when he says, and let me see if I can find it in my notes, that, and I didn't write down the page number, but good conversations are not just about transmitting information. They're called to live in a responsive state of being. Accept this, and the world talks back to us. That's really, so he's not approaching this as a Christian, though he is talking about difficult conversations that include religion. But by saying that we're called to live responsively is very much in line with ecclesial or virtue ethics. How can I respond? How can we respond? How should I be as a Christian? The focus on character and vision. The emphasis too is upon narrative and how Christian narrative shapes our understanding of who we are to be in the world, and that notion of um, being in conversation as a way to answer a call that's coming to us from someone we're talking to. Again, it's very mundane every day, but it has these powerful implications to it. All right. And another thing raised by this is Ian Williams again, and he gave the Massey lectures in, I believe it was 2024, that this book is based on, that you read the last chapter. And he refers to an author named Bakhtin, who refers to, like, if we think about the units in conversation, it's not a sentence. You don't say a sentence and then stop and expect another person to respond to you. So Bakhtin calls this utterance. And what it is the length, however long the person speaks, is an utterance. But what that means is that that form of thinking about language is inherently responsive. And much as that one quote talks about seeing through to another person, he's talking about this flow of being seen and seeing yourself. This is all part of the dynamic. The other thing about conversation that's interesting in terms of ethics is it isn't something that we do and then we finish with. So there's that notion too, that ethics is part of our daily existence. It's not something we're ever finished with. We pause and then we begin again. So there's that sense of hopefulness to it as well. Even if we really mess up in a conversation, there's that beginning again.
Can I just ask the question?
Yeah.
I've been in conversation, and I'm using that in scare quotes, with people who did not, uh, it's not an utterance such as you were referring to,
Hmm.
because it doesn't seem to um, even expect a response. It's more a declamation of something or other. So are we defining conversation as that exchange? Is that exchange in some way a necessary precondition of something we're calling conversation as opposed to another form of speech?
Well, it'll be interesting to hear what you have to say about confessions, because that does seem to be, is that a declamation? Or is it a conversation with God? And what makes the difference? So when in the final chapter that you read in Williams, it's good conversations. So it is because the monologue and William says too, there's qualities of silence, tones of silence that just finish what you have to say, and then I'm going to say what I have to say. There's not that space between you finish talking and then another. So and I'll just give you a kind of, again, mundane example because this is around us all the time. So for Christmas dinner, and part of this dinner party, it was complicated by the fact that there was a person who um, did not speak English almost at all, and so he needed translation. And so him and his partner, or she was often translating for him, and then the whole dinner party seemed to break into small groups. And it reminded me of the epigraph to the first chapter in William's book. It was impossible to get a conversation going. Everyone was talking too much. So it just felt like there was no space. There was no, I've rarely experienced this, but I have, where people at the table, and it's not this huge long table, miles long. It's a short table. There were seven people around it. And I have had the experience where people paused, they were listening to what the speaker had to say. They then asked more questions and gave that person space, and then it moved to someone else, and so on and so forth. But that again, I've had a fair number of dinner parties, and it seems to be the exception rather than the rule. And that doesn't mean the other chaotic things aren't fun in their own way, but I was especially aware this time of how it just broke into fragments and it just didn't seem to, it didn't feel like a conversation finally. And there were some very particular reasons for that in this case. Um, so what do you consider? Oh, and I should just add one final point. Because conversation, it's this possibility of beginning again. Again, that's that, in Christian ethics, this idea of forgiveness, certainly that we can begin again, say, well, this didn't work. I had this role in that not working well. And it's ephemeral, it disappears, it's gone, even though some conversations haunt us, maybe because of what we said, maybe because of what someone else said. But certainly, Williams accentuates the possibility of forgiveness, and beginning again. Um, what would be interesting to ask you now, and I'm sure whether you had a chance to read everything or not, you have views on this. What do you think characterizes our contemporary context for conversation? Like what kind of shifts how we can have conversation now? What's happening socially, politically?
Well, our freedom of speech is being questioned.
Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Well, people are being suppressed when they really say something that is offensive to somebody, and when that is clearly in another person's purview, they take offense and really respond dramatically.
Yeah. So what's missing is this possibility of disagreement, civil
Yeah,
disagreement. Yeah. Thank you.
it's sad in Iran. It's the
Mhm.
cost your life,
Mm-hmm.
thousands.
Yeah.
I think that people are misunderstanding the difference between opinion and fact. And because of that, there is this disconnect between this is my opinion, let's have a conversation, and this is fact, and it's just the way it is, and end of conversation. So I find that that is something that is getting more and more entrenched in our culture, is the idea that opinion is being seen as fact and therefore cannot lead to an understanding or at least a discourse about it.
That's very interesting. I was possibly going to mention this example a bit later, but I think I'll mention it now. Also at Christmas or after Christmas, um, I called one of my younger brothers, and we had a conversation. I learned some interesting things, and then he started saying, Trump is a peacemaker. Trump is a good businessman, and the leftists are ruining Europe. And so I didn't say anything because I figured, okay, I'm listening. And then he said, after a silence, um, a period of my silence, are you still there? And what do you think? And I said, well, I don't agree with you. And pretty soon that he basically said, well, these are facts. He had the facts and he was reading the right or accessing the right media, and I was the wrong. Like, so it turned into an argument, and I was responsible for that too because I didn't. I've been preoccupied with that because I failed to. Well, I did argue back instead of saying, okay, how do you see him as a peacemaker? In what context? And just asking questions. Who are the leftists you're actually talking about? Um, and so on. So that's a case where definitely he was asserting that what he was saying was fact. And of course, anything I might say was opinion, and grossly mistaken opinion at that. So that's part of the polarization that we see, in and so it does become, something that families experience too. And this is a person I'm very close to. So I was frustrated with my own ability because I was getting so angry. uh, my own inability to, respond in a way that, well, I can actually learn about where he's getting all this and what does he actually think. But no, I had to debate his points, and that is not listening. Listening, arguing is not listening. So I've actually had a conversation today with someone who helped me clarify that last point. But I have been thinking about it. I talked to a friend about it, but I still wasn't getting a lot of clarity until today on that. So and again, our tradition is, failure. Religions think about failure, and I definitely failed to be present in that conversation. Yeah, because I have a lot of anxiety, frankly, about politics these days. So that didn't help me be present to someone who I wanted to be present to. Um, yeah. Any other contextual factors that you can think of, like the mode of our conversation? What form do they often take? That kind of thing.
But we deal now with a lot of people who are very free to communicate opinions or their facts, or in some cases, actual facts, online and anonymously,
Yeah.
and without fear of retribution or being seen face to face or having to defend in or account for what it is you say. The anonymity of the format really polarizes communication.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. You're making the point, if we think about followers of Christ as we're incarnate beings following an incarnate God, Jesus, and what social media does and various forms of communication is, and this is Marshall McLuhan, he said it's discarnate. It's Ian Williams uses the term disembodied. And there's something um, there's a lot you can do. Sherry Turkle studied uh, media for social media for over 30 years, and she describes this one instance where this mother kept telling her daughter, "Please let me know when you're going to be home, parties and so on," and she kept not returning at the time that they had agreed. So one night the mother stayed up and she was very distressed looking. And finally the daughter had to confront what her, how distressed her mother was about her just being gone and not showing up. Up to that point, it was just a text. So she could not see her mother's response. So that's what we're dealing with exactly, the disembodied, the anonymity that ironically, given predatory algorithms, is kind of an anonymity, but we're being just because of our activity online, we're being targeted for certain ads and so on. So it seems like anonymity, but and it allows behaviors that go with that understanding, which is the point you're making as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I think which is important and often overlooked is communication is also visual. It's seeing the person with whom we're speaking
Yeah.
and being able to um, interpret how they're receiving the words we're saying and the message we're attempting to send, and you lose that with. I'm not a big fan of texts and emails.
Yeah.
I much prefer face-to-face or telephone conversations. Things do not get taken out of context, or they tend to be you tend to be certainly much more in control of communication and conversation when you're either doing it audibly or face to face.
Hmm. Yeah, because there are so many signals that are being sent to us visually,
Mhm.
face expression, gestures, everything. That we lose a lot when we don't see the person. And hearing on the phone can also be very powerful. We can really get a sense of where what's going on with that person as well. Yeah, so that kind of covers Anna DeVere Smith has a lot to say about that too. So I'll just kind of move on to the next part, which is this is partly, well, primarily the structure of it from Ian Williams in Good Conversation. He's suggesting what conversation needs is first time. So the time for complexity and nuance. He gives that great example of Matt Galloway, the interview. Um, this open-ended. It's not focused on productivity. Um, Patience, practice. His thesis, his main idea in the book is we can talk about anything if we know how. We should still talk in good faith, even if we don't know how. So again, it's a very forgiving approach. You try and you try it again. You get it wrong, you get it right, you do better, you do worse. It's not like you kind of keep progressing through the stages and there's no kind of going back. There's days where you're not at your best. he also mentions number two, curiosity and attention. So of course, Simone Weil really amplifies the meaning of attention in a theological way. But he's focused on, ask questions, ask better questions. And what I really love, and he's quoting someone else who's involved in script and dialogue writing, that you're attending at multiple levels to the said, the unsaid, and the unsayable. So when I had that conversation with my brother, I since have wondered why is he telling me this? What's going on? I don't know. But is that the unsaid? Is that the unsayable? I have no idea. So often we're in conversations and we get inklings, or perhaps a day later we might have a much stronger sense of what was going on at the level of the unsaid or even unsayable. Um, I had a very, very keen experience of that when my uncle was dying last year. And, after his death, talking to his sons and other people, he lost two children. One became very handicapped in like 3 years old, and then the other died of Hong Kong flu and was not yet 6. And very near the end, in the last week of his life, my cousin said he was really wrestling with that and said, I should have had more therapy related to these deaths, because he almost ended a relationship with a woman who, in the last 3 years of his life, he had a very happy relationship with, but he could not tolerate her family asking him about his non-surviving children. And so it was something he really struggled with. And a cousin told me at the funeral that a minister had said to him that the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children. This was said to him when a child died. They left to go out on a Saturday night. The grandparents, Opa and Oma, were looking after this daughter. They did not see her again. They were not allowed to go near her. And then the doctor said, the child is dead. Did not even use her name when. So this haunted him all his life. And he still was not able to talk about it. He talked about the need to have talked about it more, but he still couldn't say to his children, we're piecing things together a little bit, and we can only guess. But so that I just find that very powerful, and the level of attention required in conversation, that there's so many nuances to what's going on, and what's possible to say. And so they talks about school studies as being a way to kind of form yourself as a more attentive person. And so what I'm proposing is that conversations are daily encounters that you can practice becoming more attentive, which is a form of that is prayer and love of God. Um, so that's the theological turning of that curiosity and attention, that Williams doesn't offer, but They does. And then thirdly, improvisation, self-forgetfulness, and spontaneity. So he uses, among other examples, the film Before Sunrise. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a lengthy conversation. And so just, um, I often notice the difference with sending someone an email and then kind of showing up at their office and just having a quick conversation. It never just sticks to, we don't ever just stick to, this is the business at hand. We just kind of, the conversation just meanders for a while. It doesn't even have to be that long, but you can often learn something in that encounter that there's no way you would have by sending a quick email. So it's the efficiency of the email, but there's something lost there too. The other thing, that improvisation is, I love the analogy, Adam Phillips, who's a child or a psychoanalyst, British. He says we tend to learn ethics as the toilet training model, which is, you kind of hold it in until you're in the appropriate place. Um, and there's certainly a role for that kind of holding back. Um, but what improvisation, and it's really tricky. It's more like, I don't know, riding a bicycle or even a unicycle. It requires balance. So then you feel yourself in a conversation, and sometimes you're just on that bike and it feels really good, and other times, like wobble or could be the wind or something. So that's the other model. He says there's the toilet training model is control, like having to control. Whereas the riding a bicycle is more like that improvisation, adapting to conditions, and it's like learning to walk. So you're going to fall and get up again, like young children fall and get back up again. Or riding a bicycle, same thing, falling and getting back up again, running into things. Um, so then number four, the awareness of being relational. I already quoted this to you, that while Williams is not approaching this theologically, what he says, good conversations are not just about transmitting information. And some would say they're not about transmitting information. And elsewhere, he does say that they're about forging connection. They're a call to live in a responsive state of being where it becomes possible for the world to talk back to us. And then finally, the silence. So, so this is not something that gets emphasized in the discussion of conversation very much, but this is what I found very rich in what Ian Williams is doing. Um, it's not just an exchange of words and being aware of the tone of voice. That can often be a source of argument. Well, your tone, people pointing out your tone. Um, but can we attend to the tones of silence? And there is, if we think in terms of subversive ethics power, that dynamic of silencing. So Ian Williams gives an example of Einstein. He was married to the only female physicist in his class. And then he wrote her this letter that talked about how she needs to make sure, clothes, laundry done, 3 meals a day in my room, bedroom, and study kept tidy. And then you will renounce all personal relationships with me insofar as they are not completely necessary for social reasons. Specifically, you will forgo my sitting at home with you, my going out or traveling with you. And C, you will obey the following points in your relations with me. You will not expect any intimacy from me, nor will you reproach me in any way. You will stop talking to me if I request it. You will leave my bedroom or study immediately without protest if I request it. You will undertake not to belittle me in front of our children, either through words or behavior. So he was already corresponding with another woman at that time, and she complied with those demands and that silencing for 3 months, and then she left him with her children. And 5 years later, they divorced, and then he was married immediately to his cousin. So silencing, so it's this ambiguous. Silence can be non-responsiveness to what someone is saying. On the other hand, it can create space for the other person to speak and to be heard. I already mentioned the Yogi Berra comment about it was impossible to get a conversation going. Everyone was talking too much. And then Augustine, this relates for me to silence, talks about self-restraint and community in the one page that's not from book one. And this came as an insight to me because I was used to reading the translation that said continence. And so Sarah Rudin, who translates the section you read from Confessions, you order us to have self-restraint. And then he goes on to say, by self-restraint, we are tied tightly together, restricted and reduced into the oneness from which we flowed out into multiplicity. And then he goes on, set me on fire, you command me to be self-restrained. Now, some of that might sound to us like, okay, tied tightly together, restricted, and so on. But his notion was that by coming to unity, that's the orientation of being one in God and one in community. There's also on the list of quotations, he was fascinated with how people share joy and community and this to me is also about that self-restraint. When it's someone's moment to have a joyful moment that you can share that without resentment. And this fascinated him. When many rejoice, the joy is richer in persons too, because they ignite and can incandesce from one another. So they incandesce. He uses a lot of fiery language to describe what's possible. And so those are, I'll just run through them again. So we need time for good conversations. We need curiosity and attention, improvisation, self-forgetfulness, spontaneity. The awareness, what it brings us to awareness of is being relational, related, and silence, though it can be it's sort of like a poet said to me once, ambiguity in poetry is of like two kinds, like cholesterol, good and bad. So silence has that feature too. There can be bad silencing and silence. There can be the silence of someone rolling their eyes while you say something that's very dismissive. And there can be that leaning in toward you. So maybe this might be a good point to take a 5-minute break. What we'll do afterwards is you can think about this during the break. That's very short. So can book one of Confessions be considered a conversation? You know, there is a lot of talking going on. It seems to be, is it all Augustine? So that's something to think about. Returning at, well, on the hour. It's 7:55 here. It's probably later if you're in Ontario. It is later if you're in Ontario, and I don't know where the rest of you are.
Okay, that's great. We'll be back at the top of the hour then. Thank you. Albert, I was thinking about what you were asking about or saying about conversation, and I was also thinking how increasingly it seems that people are not even getting the same facts, so that depending on your media source, it's not as if people have a disagreement over the interpretation of the same fact. It's they are getting entirely different facts, and that too um, makes it difficult, if not impossible, to have conversation. I think of your brother, who seems not unlike my brother, that we read entirely different media. We have entirely different sources, so that even the very information that shapes the way in which we understand the world is different. And so having conversation becomes just that much more difficult.
Yeah, that's a really key point too, is siloed media and you know that just gets more accentuated in social media where you only are shown whatever fits what you've read before.
Hmm.
And as you said, different go-to sources, yeah, that you rely on, a media that you trust. And whereas that person's would be, yeah, my
Hmm.
sibling would be completely different. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. We'll get started. So because at 25 after, I'd like us to break into small groups, and I'll mention the exercise when we get a little closer to that time. But at this point, just looking, and we have next time session as well, so we don't need to, we won't exhaust this, but for those of you who had a chance to look at it, can book one, can this be considered a conversation? Why or why not? And I'll just say a word about Sarah Rudin, who translated this. This is her translation. Um, the Henry Chadwick translation is very commonly read, but it makes Augustine sound like he is more systematic than he is, and she was really interested in his lyrical, poetic writing, that he kind of goes off in this direction and this. And so she wanted to give more of the flavor of his writing. in that sense. It's digressionary movement. And what I find too is the sensuousness of his language for God. His desire for God really comes through, and it's not a desire separated from erotic desire. It really is that, when he refers to light of my heart and bread I eat within my soul. That's very sensuous. And it's full of he talks about God arousing him, rouse me, and so on and so forth, like wake me, but also kind of inflame my passion is what he's talking about. So does it seem to you a conversation, or is it just Augustine in a monologue? This is what Ross referred to at the beginning. Um,
But
yeah,
isn't any sort of
Michelle.
reading a conversation, whether it's a conversation with yourself or a conversation with someone else or with God, in this case, you're writing and you're having a conversation with whatever that being is that you're writing to. So it
Hmm.
could be a self conversation, something that you're just considering on a personal note, or all of the things that you're bringing to somebody else, you're conversing with them. I think any writing is a conversation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll read a little section later, a bit later, that supports what you're saying in an interesting way. Michelle, did you?
Um, yeah, it strikes me, it's a little like a psalm, the way it's written, where it's, here I am bearing my soul to you, O God. And it's that same sense to me of, yes, it's a conversation, but um it's also just a stripping down of who he
Mm,
is.
hmm,
And that makes it a very potent, I think, conversation.
hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's a vivid image of stripping down. And it also, Augustine, the way that people learn about him often stereotypically is that he hated sex. And he made Christians hate the body and sex. Um, and there are, feminist readers who are saying, sure, yes, he had a very hierarchical sense of like the body, the soul, and, in a Platonic kind of sense of how one should rule the other, and, the comments about women notwithstanding in this. Um, but also very, he's talking about wonder and the capacity for contemplation and wonder, and to orient that toward God, and that would organize all our other loves, all our multiplicity would be organized in this one love, which isn't to say that those other loves are not important, but they get unified through this one love for God. I'll just read the part that Linda reminded me of. Um, because he in the um, in book one on page 9, he's talking about he's talking about acquisition of language, and that's something that Ian Williams talks about as well, is the humanizing element of um, acquiring language in community. And some of that, his lessons in Greek were accompanied by beatings. And so he never learned Greek well. Um, but he reflects, that's on page 9, the bottom of the page, the last full paragraph, 3 lines down. I couldn't show my desires because they were inside me, whereas other people were outside. And no perception that they possessed had the power of entering into my consciousness. So I threw around my arms and legs and I threw off sounds, making signs resembling my wishes, the few signs I could make. That is, and as good as I could make them. There wasn't really any resemblance. So this is much like the said is what we rely on, but this interior, the unsaid and the unsayable, perplexes him too. And then in book 10, which you didn't read, he goes back to um, this notion where not only in book 1 is God's forbearance, so constantly holding, being attentive, being merciful. He loves the image of the prodigal son, of the father welcoming the return, even when he has dissipated his wealth. But in book 10, he says, to you, master, to whose eyes the deep chasm of the human conscience is laid bare, what would be hidden in me even if I didn't wish to confess it to you? I could hide you away from myself, but not myself from you. As it is, because my groans are witness to my displeasure with myself, you are radiant, you please me, and rouse my love and desire. I turn scarlet at the very thought of myself, and I throw myself away and choose you instead. I can please neither myself nor you unless it comes from you. And I am caught in the act, then, master, of being whoever I am. I've already said how I profit from confessing to you. I don't confess, this is where Linda's point comes up. I don't confess with physical words, with the sounds of speech, but with the words of my soul and the shouts of my thoughts, which are familiar to your ear. And so you see how sensuously he engages. And then on the next page, therefore, my testimony or my confessions, given an audience before you, is inaudible yet audible. There is no racket, only silence, but my feelings yell out loud. And he's saying, how do other people know I'm telling the truth? How do they discern that? And what he goes on to say is that love knows that this person is telling the truth. Since selfless love believes all things, at least among those it binds to itself and thus unifies. I too will join in testifying to you in such a way that other people can hear me at the same time. I can't prove to them that what I confess is the truth, but those whose ears love opens to me, believe me. So there's a way in which not only is love the way that you ought to interpret scripture for Augustine to find its truth, but it's also the way that we can hear what other people are saying and to follow Williams, what they are not saying, what they are unable to say, and what they leave unsaid. Are there other things you notice in this book 1? There's probably a lot. I don't know if you encountered Augustine before? No. Okay. So it is a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think just the observation that for many, perhaps on this call, confession means confessing wrongdoing. And this is not just confessing of wrongdoing, it's also confessing faith. So, for example, when we say a creed, we are confessing faith. And so I don't know whether that helps you maybe understand what's being talked about here when Augustine talks about confessing. He's not necessarily talking about wrongdoing. He's talking about the expression of faith. And that's just part of the technical language of theology and discipleship.
Yeah, and so in fact, in terms of translation, Sarah Rudin says a better translation would be testimony.
Yeah.
But she said if I called this book Testimony, um, no one would know that she had, well, I'm sure it would get out that she was translating Confessions, but she had to keep the title. But she said that's not actually the most accurate. And so she prefers testimony, and it's like bearing witness. So it's bearing witness to this forbearing, this God who constantly is for us and loves us.
Mhm.
That's what and he feels this love in response because he's saying, unless you've given it to me, that's how he ends the book is and throughout is the gifts that this good God gives is what he is testifying.
If we think back, friends, to a previous module where we were talking about telling our faith stories, that too is testimony. So
Yeah.
what we're seeing here is another example, albeit far more eloquent and far more and far deeper, but it's another example of the same sorts of things that we were practicing in that module. I don't know whether that helps you make some more connections with what you're reading in Augustine. But he's struggling with some of the same things that we talked about in those sessions about what words can we use to actually convey to others the truth of what we're feeling and what we're experiencing. And so, in some ways, despite the very different framing, Augustine is a fellow disciple telling us his story.
Which may well be one of the reasons this has remained such a powerful book. And even in its time, the expectation was that you would tell a story of conversion or turning around.
Mhm.
And he was involved with like a Manichae sect for many years. He was reading pagan literature, and he draws that into his understanding of not so much the Manichaean, which is a dualist, good versus evil, both material, but the other literatures really inform how he understands Christianity. But um, what was unexpected is that he talks about continuing temptation. So it's not this conversion and then he's completely cured. It's more like convalescence, and that was unexpected at that time. That he would be able to find new sources of temptation really surprised his readers.
Mhm.
I guess we could leave it there unless there's certainly more to say, and you can maybe with that introduction have a look um, back at it in 2 weeks' time. So in terms of what we're going to do next is this is a way to practice um, some of the qualities of good conversation. with that emphasis upon silence, as that is something that we don't tend to accentuate. And so what you'll be doing in groups of three, and I believe there will be one group of two then, is that right? Um, in any case, and that just means that the people with only two would have time just to chat afterwards. But you'll have a speaker who speaks for 3 minutes to the question that you can share as whatever level of openness, or it's your choice what you share, of course. How the question is, how are you doing today? And so the person speaks for 3 minutes, and here's the tricky part. Please don't say anything in response. You can give nods or looks, but don't say anything in response. And the person number two, and this job will have to be taken by if there's only two in your group, this person will have to do both. But person number two will be the listener and will relate back. This is what I heard you say, but please don't write notes. Like, don't be a stenographer of what that person is saying, because sure, you can, if you're writing all kinds of notes, copious notes, you can pretty much retell what that person said. That's not the intention. The intention is to notice really key points. What did you think um, where was the emphasis? And um, so that's what the listener is doing. And there's an observer who, as much as you can in the Zoom space, attending to like facial expression and gestures at certain moments. Does that seem significant? And yeah, so I'll just run through that again. So you'll I think what we'll do is have you have the groups break out for 25 minutes. So you do kind of need someone willing to time the 3 minutes, the 2 minutes, and the 2 minutes. The speaker will speak to the question, how are you doing today, for 3 minutes, to the silence of the other members of the group. Then the listener will give key points. This, I heard you say, it seemed like this. And then the observer will say, well, you had this really large gesture when you said X. So they relate for 2 minutes. So am I getting the math right? 7 minutes per person. At most, there'll be three people per group. So that's 21 minutes. And then there's flex time of 4 minutes. Again, please don't write notes. The point is to listen. You're not as if you were in a real conversation. You don't sit listening to your friend and taking notes. So that means you'll miss some things, and that's okay. And listen for the singing, which is Anna DeVere Smith, and also perhaps the unsaid. And also, please, however tempted you might be, stay silent while this is going in. Is that clear, or do I need to run through it again?
Michelle, do you have three people there with you?
Yes, I do. I was going to tell you that we can be our own group.
Okay,
Excellent.
that would be really helpful. Okay, great. All right, I will start creating the groups, and
So Michelle, you would simply say no to, oh, she just disappeared. Okay.
yeah,
She would simply say no to joining a group.
yeah, exactly. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So I forgot one component of the exercise, which was that the speaker gets to reflect back how they received what was being said. And so I missed that. I'm sorry. But so if you try this at home or somewhere else, do give the speaker a chance to respond at the end. That should be the exercise. Um, how was that? How did you find that?
In our group, the speakers got a chance to respond in all cases.
Good. Yeah, so I remembered for our group, I missed this part. So we did that too. Anyone else?
This exercise has taken me from a time of being frustrated and not fully understand what was happening to now, after this exercise, feeling relieved and glad and knowing that I can understand things. So I'm glad it turned my frustration into joy and acceptance. So thank you.
So that's a very powerful thing for a conversation and silence to do. Thank you for expressing that so clearly.
Hi,
Others?
yes, I'm Roger and I'm here with Michelle in Canfield. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity. And it was a very good exercise. And yeah, I think I personally, I felt very well and challenged at the same time. But yeah, absolutely was a great experience, a great exercise, and it will help us to practice even more our discipleship because if you cannot hear and if you cannot it's like practice the active listen to someone you can't understand them and then you cannot walk together and so on. So yeah, thank you for this opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That is the point. It's a way of living out just as disciples of Christ. Anyone else wish to comment?
What I'd like to say, and I couldn't help but stop thinking as you gave the course this evening and how articulate you are in conveying the importance and the message of silence and speaking. I kept thinking I'm a choral singer, and the analogy of song as it relates to conversation. The overlaps are quite striking where, we sing in chorus and we sing in harmony at times and then in that same song will be a solo. We'll sing forte, we'll sing pianissimo. There are pauses, there are instrumentalists in the midst of that conversation, and we need to allow space for them to have their part in the song. And so I I couldn't help but think of the similarity to singing and all of its parts and pieces, and how the course this evening reminded me of that in how you
Mm.
expressed communication and its various parts.
That's a really beautiful analogy, and one that people, I'm sure, can relate to kind of offer a summation. So thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very rich analogy.
Yeah.
Anyone else? What I'll do is I'll spend a bit of time talking about the next um, time we meet in 2 weeks' time, but I just want to be sure that everyone who wishes to speak has had a chance. Okay, so for the next time, so you have some homework. If you have a chance to read, maybe at this point, Augustine will seem a little less daunting. You might read that, and if the questions from this week are helpful to guiding your reading, and that you come up with responses, that would be really good. Um, and so for the next week, and you don't have to focus. There were a lot of points raised about conversation, and so just one or two things. Um, and related to that, what conversational virtues do you want to practice and why? So, what good things about conversation do you want to um, and just make a list of 12, and if you can be prepared to give reasons for the first three. Now, I included a sermon where I discuss Benjamin Franklin. The other reading is selections from the autobiography, which if you want to read, you can, or if you don't have time, just look at the sermon, which gives you um, near the end of it, there's a discussion of Benjamin Franklin and his 13 virtues that he had a system for practicing, one per week. But what I would also ask you to consider doing is to approach one conversation with what you think is the key virtue, the key good thing about conversation. If that's silence, like silence that shows that you're responsive. And I want you to enter just a conversation where you practice that, you try that. Just very intentionally say, like, in this conversation, I'm gonna try this thing. This I'm gonna try silence, like leaving more space for the other person to speak and kind of noticing what happens. So you've kind of had that experience in the breakout group, and silence might not be the thing that you choose. It might be, you know, I don't know, being kind of concise in responding rather than, going here, there, and all over, like just keeping your own comments kind of briefer than usual. Just try to challenge yourself, something that you notice that maybe you struggle with, and try that. And just also be very forgiving if it doesn't feel like it's working all that well. Um, and just say this is, it's about practice. It's about trying something new, possibly not new, might not be new at all, but maybe you just want to practice it with more intentionality. That's also possible. Is that clear? And there is the guide, silence, attention in conversation, or what did I call it? I called it conversation as love of God and neighbor. Yeah. So it's a concrete practice. It's something I doubt that any of you will go through a day without having multiple conversations, and they might not all be in person. But so there's, if you want to practice more than once, go ahead. But once is all you need to do before 2 weeks are up. And you have the list of 12 virtues. That's kind of good things about conversation. That's kind of your list. But think about why are the top three the top three?
Good. All right, then. Thank you so much, Alida. Very rewarding and very interesting evening indeed. And thank you, folks, for your participation and blessings on your journey. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Right.
Good.
Thank you.